You have been truly blessed to have been chosen. Chosen? Why me? Rufus' eyes search for answer in the old man's eyes. Why are any of us Rufus? Do you believe now? I believe. A small head nods. He could not refute what his own eyes had seen. His own ears had heard. Let me baptize you before I leave this earth, asked the old man, feeling weaker, knowing the end was but words away. Baptize? Will it hurt? Asked Rufus hesitantly. No, not at all. Get that cup of water over there. He directs the boy. Fetching the cup, Rufus holds it out before the old man. Petrus blesses it, as he had so many times before. Give me the cup. Gently now. Petrus instructs him. Come closer. I need to wet your head. Fingers cling painfully to the cup, uttering the scared words of baptism. Holy words flowed like wine. Rufus, with this water I baptize you in the name of the Father, and Son, and Holy Spirit. Tilting the cup forward, water washes over the boy's forehead and closed eyes. A blood-stained forefinger made the sign of the cross on his forehead. Go, my son. In the name of Christ. Is that it? That's it, I'm afraid. How do you feel? No different. Wiping the water and cross away and running fingers like a comb through long blonde tangled hair. Good. Then it worked. Mused Petrus, feeling a pain in his chest. Waited for it to pass. Within the shadows a putrid snake slithers along a wall, hissing in disgust at the ceremony, its forked tongue tasting the foul air. The boy was lost, but there would be others. His master would not be pleased. Disappearing into the abyss of the grotto, Petrus looked to the ring he had been given by Yeshua decades earlier, of how he had told him he was the rock on which the church would be built. He did not feel like a rock. Take the ring, gesturing for the boy to remove the ring lest the guards steal it when they stripped him from the cross. Wrestling with the ring and the old man's swollen bony joints, Rufus pulls it free, stained with blood, leaving a white shadow on the old man's finger, and examines the dull-looking ring. The relief showing 2 crossed keys the old man had spoken of. Unsure of their significance. Do I have the keys now? In some way you do. I should rename you Petrus. I don't think my father would be pleased with that, remarked Rufus, looking over his shoulder, as if his father would appear at any moment. No. I don't think he would be. Let it be our secret, shall we? Winked the old man to the young boy. Okay, Rufus promised. What do I do with it? The ring. Keep it safe. You were chosen for a reason, Rufus. How? The boy asks curiously. Ah. There's the mystery. Only you will know, advised Petrus. This was no place for a young boy to witness the death of an old man. His time was over. The boys had just begun. Go now and spread the word, and let an old man die in peace, instructed Petrus, feeling the sharp pains in his chest growing more intense. Rufus looked back at the old man suspended on its head, his chest heaving as the spasms took hold. Reluctant to leave, A divine hand nudges him away. Bye. An innocent voice bids the old man farewell, and the boy scampers quickly up the stone stairwell from sight. Alone. Petrus took in the dimness of the grotto. Unsure if it was dimly lit, or if it were him. To one side he saw the man. A halo about him. No words need be spoken. No earthly breath be taken. Within a blink of an eye Petrus found himself standing Michael, staring back at the frail old man nailed to a wooden cross. An old man weathered by the years, by the countless footsteps that had gotten him to this glorious day. Unfurling arms like wings, and a brilliant white light spontaneously radiated from the grotto. The light spiraled up the stairwell, through the imperial palace, and over the city of Rome. Citizens looked to the clear blue sky, expecting a thunderclap to sound. Hearing nothing, resumed their persecution of Christians. A darkness befell the grotto. Rufus returned home and found his father napping on a wooden bench, exhausted having crucified Christians that morning. Climbing the attic stairs to his room, places the wooden horses and dull silver ring in a small wooden box. Staring at the ring laying within, touches his forehead recalling the message the old man had told him. Wary of the dangers and death he faced if discovered. In time he would seek out others of the new religion, and spread the word of the one true God, of eternal life. Replacing the lid, ties the box off with coarse string, before shoving it into a darkened corner from sight. That evening at supper Rufus broke bread, and sipped on watered-down wine. Recalling the words the old man had spoken to him. Yeshua. Rufus mutters to himself before thinking. Yeshua? Who's Yeshua? His father asked curiously. Just a friend, Tata, Rufus grinned to himself. Just a friend. The informant. Rome, some 2,000 years later. Somewhere in the Vatican. In a very large lavishness office assigned to a man of rank and position. An office void of sound and movement other than the fluttering lace curtains in the morning breeze. Sat a man behind an ancient wooden desk, as his predecessors had. Deep in thought. Deep in prayer. He had sinned. It was his job to sin. To do what was required of him. Killing was never easy. He had served the church devoutly for decades. Perhaps his whole life. Wondering how God would judge him when that day came. Did his transgressions in the name of the church transcend his sins? The telephone rang unexpectedly, echoing off polished marble surfaces, filling every square inch of the large room with its incessant ringing, as though pleading to be answered. Breaking the impasse of the silence, and the man's thoughts. Breaking his prayers. The man eyes the defiant phone with suspicion. Who would be calling at this early hour? Who would be calling him? Lifting the handset from its cradle, annuls the intrusion of noise, filling the large room with a deafening silence once again. Hello? The man spoke softly and economically. Words were never spoken unless they needed to be. A word could kill if spoken carelessly. There were always ears listening. Someone somewhere. A receptionist. A spy. Someone willing to profit from the word. The man listened carefully for subtle crackles on the line. Confident the line was safe, recognizes the familiar voice of an informant. It was not the first time the two men had spoken. "Tell me more," the man asked, wanting specifics. The informant continued to dispatch the details of a treasure. Priceless not by its wealth, but its significance. A worried expression came over the man's face as he took in the news of the discovery of the long-forgotten holy relic. "The first? Are you sure?" the man asked, as if he questioned the relic as authentic. "If true, it would exalt the word of God." The informant had been reliable in the past, there was no need to begin to doubt him now. "I understand, my friend," the man said in a grave voice, weighing the situation with an urgency building in his mind. Pausing momentarily, pondering the measures that would be required to secure the relic's return to the church. Pondering measures others would take to possess it. His mind filters through the names of those in the immediate vicinity. Word would already be out. Scouts. Opportunists. Whispering leads back to their masters. Scheming their own repatriation of the trophy. He needed resources. His organization had resources. Assets would be activated to assist if the situation escalated or deteriorated. "How can I help?" asked the man, dismissing the competitors. Listening carefully to the request being asked of him. "Yes, I see. The sun. I understand. Follow the sun. I see. Rest assured, my friend. I will take care of the sun," the man promised the informant. The informant hangs up and the phone goes dead, leaving to the dead signal on the line ringing in his ear. The man waits before hanging up, listening carefully for unexpected clicks that never came. Replacing the handset. Contemplates a strategy for the relic's return. Contesting with men also with their eyes also on the prize. Men that would kill to obtain it. The man would kill for it too, if it came to fight. If he was cornered, the treasured relic must be reappropriated by the church. From whence it had come, so it shall return. It was too scared to be left in hands of relic collectors. Grubby little men scavenging for personal gain, and boosting rights. Brawn, a name surfaced of the fallen brethren. He who possessed the relic would be king of kings. He would have to inform his superior. There was only one. Unless you counted God. The man lifted the handset of the old phone, and dialed a simple 3-digit number. Scrolling each digit deliberately, unhurriedly, and listened patiently to the dial tone, waiting for it to be answered. "Your Eminence, please excuse the intrusion. I have some very important news." Cardinal Cassini disclosed to his superior, His Holiness the Pope. Arthur of Watford. Some days later, somewhere in East London, an autumn morning broke upon Watford Terrace. A cold north breeze blew, blowing with it a postman whistling an unrecognizable tune to himself, much to the annoyance of Arthur waiting at the mailbox. No one should whistle unless it was in tune, and preferably a tune one could recognize. He waited for the annoying whistle to arrive. "No mail today, Arthur," the postman called out as he cycled by. To carry on his whistling way again, pushed along by the north breeze, Arthur returned inside the terraced homestead, closing the door in time to keep out the chill that was following him inside. "Any mail today, Arthur?" His aunt called out from the kitchen. "Not today, auntie." Not that he was expecting any other than a gas bill. Slumping into his father's comfy armchair, allowed it to engulf him, as though to hold him prisoner, and contemplated his existence, as he did most days since being laid off from the council. 29 years old, found himself successfully unemployed after yet another global recession had sent its redundant ripples around the world, sweeping away those caught in its path. Staring out the laced window to the suburban street lined with identical terraced houses, Michael sat quietly unseen in a chair opposite, taking in the manger that was Arthur's home, eating what he imagined was ginger cake, and drinking what he imagined was tea, watchful of the young man sitting opposite, curious as to why he had been chosen. Such decisions were beyond him. Taking another bite of the imagined ginger cake, allowing the imagined crumbs to fall to his lap. The morning sun's rays filtered through the lace curtains, diluted, straining to reach Arthur. Sensing he was not alone in the room, looks about for his aunt, but sees no one. The sun's warmth re-inflating his deflated self-esteem. Days had blurred together to become months. Seeing no change on his grey horizon, stares blankly out to the terraced street, as though frozen in time. For a moment thinks he sees someone sitting opposite from the corner of his eye. Blinking, the vision disappears. Cake crumbs pepper the seat of the chair opposite. Dismissing the nebulous aberration, his days consumed with collecting the morning mail and watching football matches at the local bar, over a pint and a packet of Walker's crisps, usually with his best mate Phil, who had also been laid off from the council. Arthur's father peddled his company's stationery products over Europe, away at time for weeks traveling, only to return and tell exotic tales of his travels, of places and foods and equally exotic people, rousing Arthur's sense for adventure. Adventures he had only ever read about in books. To escape the captivity of his father's armchair. To escape Watford Terrace. Sensing something was calling him. He could smell it. And it was not the gas works down the road. His mother had died when he was young. Old photographs reminded him of her beauty. Vague memories of her love would flash to mind. Imaginary, but real. Everything happens for a reason, he had told himself, trying to reconcile her premature death. That reason was beyond him. Believing she was somehow watching over him. His aunt moved in soon after to care for him while his father traveled on business. She was the closest thing he had to a mother. After a while she had become a part of furniture. And something one could not throw out. His aunt was a lovely lady, as anyone who did not live with her could attest. Taking a daily dose of medication, with more drugs in her medical cabinet than there were on the streets. It would not have surprised him if she turned out to be head of an East End drug cartel. Taking in stray cats, naming them Dizzy, Lizzie, and Cuddles. She would often be heard humming an unrecognizable tune. Arthur could not begrudge her these few comforts. When not at the local bar, Arthur could be found sitting in his father's armchair, drinking incalculable cups of tea, and eating ginger cake, and watching television reruns, feeling himself slipping slowly into his aunt's medicated world. and he wondered how long it would be before he too would be making involuntary grunts and humming a fairy tune to himself. Taking stock of Watford Terrace, and the world outside. It might have been the chill in the autumn air that had unsettled him that day. It could have been the postman's annoying whistle. But something did not feel right. As though something was about to happen and he could not put his finger on it. Restless. He fidgets in his father's chair trying to get comfortable. That evening Arthur retired to his room to read. His aunt stopped by wishing him a good night, and turned off the light, as if he were still 9. Having faith that God believed in him, he would recite a humble prayer. Giving thanks for another day. Asking for an adventure that would take him from Watford Terrace. It had been a typical day for him. As it had every day since being laid off. The cogs of his universe were already turning. And had done so long before he had taken his first breath. Or uttered his first prayer. Divine revelations set down eons in the past, were about to be played out. The adventure he had so long wished for was at hand. The flying jug. Meanwhile, earlier that evening at the local tavern, the flying jug. Pool's balls chatter loudly. Like particles in an accelerator collision, they scatter in all directions, other than where they were intended. Before ricocheting silently off tired green felt cushions. Bugger. Lies the player, handing the cue stick to Phil, grinning to himself. Phil chalks the tip with distinct strokes before blowing dust away. And eyes up his shot. Beyond the table in his line of sight, sitting at the bar, a long-legged lass in 6-inch heels. Long bleached blonde wavy hair. Adding to her allure and wanton beauty. There was something exotic about her. His mind in 2 places. And he mishits the cue ball, sending it nowhere in a hurry. Laugh arouses from those watching on. The lass giggles while sucking on a straw suggestively. Her eyes fixed on Phil. Now playing her boyfriend. A rouge-looking gentleman who had wandered in off the street in search of a beer and good time. Hustling Pool to pay for drinks and change. Phil was good, but not that good. Maybe he was. Or was he? After several pints, he was just getting warmed up. In the zone. Veins pumping testosterone and alcohol. Feeling invincible. Peacocking for the young woman on the stool. He would show her a thing or two. Fantasies of sweeping her off her stool. He grins back at her after the mishit shoot, and shrugs his shoulders. Your shot. Handing the cue stick back to his opponent. The hustler, having fooled around until now, was playing with Phil. Luring him into a false sense of security. Letting him win more games than he had lost. His girlfriend at the bar would distract his attention from the game. Bang. Bang. The hustler sinks 2 in a row. It was as if he had set the shots up. Leaving only the black at the far end of the table. Phil had no chance with 3 left on the table. Unless the stranger missed. And waits anxiously as the man lines up the shot to win the game. Taking longer than usual. Maybe to allow the woman at the bar to weave her magic on Phil. Leading him into temptation. The man draws back the cue stick slowly, almost professionally. Thud clatter. Q-tip misstrikes the cue ball, and rushes unimpeded down the table towards the black ball. It was an easy shot any fool could make. Even him. Phil can't watch. Closes his eyes and waits for the resounding clunk of the black ball hitting the back of the pocket. An end to the game. Bugger. The hustler lies, holding out the cue stick to Phi to take the next shot. Phew. Phil gasps. A reprieve? What was the chances of that? The pool gods were smiling on him. Fingers twitch along the shaft, as if playing a flute. He could smell victory in the air. The cue ball had been set up nicely for his next shot. He could not have placed it there himself better. Failing to see he had been set up, plays one of his 2 remaining balls into a side pocket without contemplating his next shot. Clunk. Almost mishitting it. The hustler shakes his head in frustration. What does he have to do to help the guy win this game? Miraculously, the cue ball finishes close to the last remaining color. Ignoring where the black was, Phil blindly slams home the final ball into a corner pocket and watches the cue ball bouncing aimlessly about the table. And back again. Chalking his cue, blows dust from its tip as though blowing kisses to the lass at the bar. Now uncrossing her legs. And waited for the cue ball to finally come to a halt, center table. The black ball positioned over a corner pocket. The hustler stands back, allowing Phil space. Not to crowd him. Not to pressure him. That would come later. All eyes are on Phil. Taking a deep breath, this was it, for victory. For the girl. Eyes fixate on the white cue ball, then to the 8 ball that's sitting over the open pocket. And he began to overanalyze the shot. Was to the left? Was it to the right? Play it straight, you fool, he told himself. Then changed his mind at the last moment. Closes his eyes, exhaled, drew back his arm and slammed the white into the black. Sending the black flying into the pocket as the white ball followed perilously behind. Only to stop millimeters short of falling in. And short of forfeiting the game. Phew, Phil sighs again, turning to shake the opponent's hand. Good game. You too. 20 quid says you can't do it again. The hustler baits him, still holding the grip longer and firmer than usual. Phil sensed some aggression in the man's grip. Saying he would not take no for answer. Don't know. I need to get going. Collecting the £5 notes from the lip of the table. Come on, just one more. I feel lucky, he lied. Anyway, while you're deciding, I'm going to take a piss. Yeah, whatever. Phil heads to the bar and stands beside the lass, now turning about to face him. You're a really good player. I can't play at all, she lied. All the angles and dangles and balls and things. You know what I mean? Not really, Phil begins. Haven't seen you here before, I'm Phil. Asher. You going to play again? Pressing her soft warm curves up against him. I don't know, I need to be heading home, failing to mention his mother having dinner waiting for him. He's not that good. Wants to play for 20 quid. It wouldn't be fair. £20, oh. If you win, you buy me a drink. She teases him. Careful what you wish for. He grins, blood rushing from his brain. Phil nods his head to the barmaid, shaking her head at him being played. Everyone else in the bar was waiting for Phil to realize it. Sean pushes pint glass in front of him. and he takes a mouthful of beer. Asher sucks on a cocktail straw. Her lips pursed about it. Her eyes looking into his. Her cleavage beneath the glass. With his decision-making ability now deprived of blood, there was only one decision he could make. Okay, I'll do it. Sculling the dark pint of courage just as the stranger returned to the bar, rack 'em up. Called out Phil. "Datta boy," said the hustler grinning ear to ear. 20, wasn't it? Pulling a note from his wallet and placing it on the lip of the table. "Yeah, 20, Phil pulls out his wallet, unsure what it contained. Only to discover a 50. The last of his benefit money. "Can you break a 50? I'll go one better, I'll match you." Pulling out a 50 and replacing the 20 with it. "No, no." Phil tried to protest just as the man made the break, shattering the balls about the marble table particle accelerator. Too late. Money was on the table, and the balls had been broken. "Damn," cusses Phil. Not one to back out of any challenge, sucks in a deep breath and waits for the balls to stop rolling about. One drops. An eyes scan as to what had fallen. "You're on little ones, Junior," the hustler informs Phil. Perhaps he should not have had that last beer. His confidence was waning. 50 quid was at stake. Wham! Blam! The hustler sinks 2 more in quick succession before being blocked and laying up his next shot to snooker Phil behind the 8-ball. This was not the same opponent he played and beaten easily just before. The hustler hands Phil the cue with a stern look on his face that said, "Don't mess with me, kid." Nervously, Phil contemplates the shots available. Nothing. Get it wrong, and he forfeits 2 shots. Something did not smell right. And it was not just Asher's provocative perfume. The stranger now standing beside as she handed an elongated case, which could contain only one thing. His worst fears. He was being hustled. He had to chuckle. It was too good to be true. The games. The girl. Oh well, what the heck. He concedes and bashes the cue ball about the table hoping something will fall in a hole. Nothing. Leaving the lolly scramble of colored bonbons to the hustler to pick over. Phil offered the cue stick to the stranger who declined it. In preference to his own professional cue. Chalking it with his own chalk. Blowing chalk dust subtly from its tip. Eyes focused on the table, and the options possible. Wham! Blam! Without hesitation, plucks 2 more balls from the table. Leaving Phil again in a trapped position. Without chalking up, he bashes again, and one of his balls drop. Asher claps from the bar stool. The hustler grins, charmed by his girlfriend's amusement. Phil had saved himself the unpleasant embarrassment of having suck one. He was on for another. Slam. Center pocket. The fight back was on. 5 to go. Click. Softly, he tickles a little one into a corner pocket. 3-4. One more to keep pace with the hustler. Eyeing his options. Nothing. Back to plan A again. Plan Phil, bash M and see what falls. Slam. Phil bashes the cue ball into one of his, causing a chain reaction. Mixing up the goulash of colored marbles. Whatever options the hustler had, just went out the window. The white ball settles tightly against the lifting cushion. The big ones were down the other end of the table, a long way from the white ball. Asher claps again, fidgeting on her stool, crossing her legs with excitement. Phil admires her long legs and longer heels. If he ever needed a cue stick, he knew where to find one. The hustler isn't amused. "Shut it, will you?" Becoming perturbed by the change of future. He didn't come to this small hick town to be made a fool of. "Hey! Speak nice to the lady." Phil steps up to him, reminding where he was. "You'll keep," warned the hustler. "I'm right here," warned Phil, not backing away. Asher claps again. Her honor was being fought over, and she sucks heavily on the blue cocktail, her big eyes looking over to Phil, his attention absorbed by what was to come next. Weighing his shots, the hustler plays safe. Click. Barely touching one of his balls, and rolling back to the far cushion. "Nice," commends Phil. The hustler ignores the compliment, and walks over to Asher. Words are spoken. Phil watches on. "You got a problem with her, you have a problem me," he warns the hustler. "Keep out of it and play your shot, kid," he warns Phil. "When I'm ready, no rush." Phil eyes the table. Nothing. Maybe one. His engineering mind determining the angles. The alignment of the planets did not look good. The domestic had cooled on at the bar. Asher sat pouting, hands lightly clapping between her thighs. What the heck? Back to plan A. Slam. Phil fires a single silo at the gaggle of balls. Thud. One of his drops. 4-4. Thud. Followed by one of the hustlers. 4-5. Damn. Curses Phil. All over Rover. The hustler insults Phil, pushing way past him. You do a lot of talking for a pool shark, insulting the hustler in front of the regulars. A chuckle rouses about the bar. Knowing Phil could give it, as well as he takes. "Gentlemen," the barman warns the two bulls, reaching beneath the bar as though for a baseball bat, only to surface with a rack of fresh pint glasses. Phil stands back. The table was open. Any professional come have cleared the table with one eye closed. But this was no professional. This was a hustler. Scruples were for the weak. Slam. Thud. In the hole. Backspin. Set up for the next. 4-6. Slam. Thud. In the hole. Backspin. Set up for the next. 4-7. Overconfidence creating an adrenaline rush, casing the cue ball to spin back too far, and settles behind one of Phil's balls. Shit. The hustler spits out, looking to Asher as though she had something to do with it. Ha. Phil chuckles to himself aloud, ensuring the hustler heard him. The bar was unusually quiet. No one wanted to speak. It could well have been the World Championship taking place. But it was not. It was Phil of Watford, taking on a woollyback hustler, thinking he could come to the sticks and fleece the locals. At 4-7 the game was far from over. with the table clearing by the moment, creating less traffic to get in the way of Phil's unpredictable shots. He had a line on one. And if the cue ball ended nearby, a shot for another. Blam! Rattle 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 thud. Rattling about the pocket before remembering to drop. 5-7. The cue ball rolls forward. No fancy backspin for him. Like himself, Phil never stepped back when challenged. The cue ball comes to a halt inches from where he wanted it to. That was good enough for him. His instincts telling him to adapt and get on with it. Asha squeals and claps her excitement. The hustler frowns, but does little to abate her enthusiasm. Closing his eyes, Phil shunts the cue stick heavily in behind the white ball, sending it flying across the table into his ball, recoiling it towards the pocket. At an angle, striking to one side, then the other, and back again. Rattling like the last ball. Undecided if it should drop, or pop back onto the table. Regulars hold their breath in anticipation. Rattle 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 rattle, rattle thud. Then silence as it fell. 6-7. Hara. Regulars holler and cheer their man Phil. The cue ball ricochets about the cushions, thudding on some, thumping on others, and stops expectantly at the center of the table, as if by the hand of God. 2 balls remain, the last of his, and the black to win the game. At one end of the table the black sat over a corner pocket. An easy shot for a blind person. Only trouble was, Phil was not blind. His ball was at the other end, center against cushion. And impossible for anyone, less so a blind man. Plan A had wood up until now. Closing his eyes, says a prayer to the patron saint of pool. Michael looks up from the bar, and his cup of English tea, and pondered who that might be. Bash! The chalked leather tip strikes the cue ball, and hurled up the table towards the defenseless ball. Pinned to cushion like a prisoner facing a firing squad. Striking its heart and sending its soul flying in one direction, and its corpus went in another, to be fused as one again as it settled back to its original position. Limp. The cue ball returned to the center of the table, as though it too had not been disturbed. And Phil wonders if he should play the shot again. Damn. He was so close. Asha slumps in her seat, saddened Phil's gallant attempts. The hustler chuckles, hunching himself over the table to line up the elementary shot. A straight poke. Black to the corner pocket, the hustler rubs the impending victory into Phil's open wounds, momentarily looking to Phil, loser, and catches him and Asha exchanging glances. Michael looks up from his tea and cucumber sandwich. Clunk. A mishit. The cue ball rolls true towards the black ball. A perfect strike. Almost. The corner pocket swallowing the black ball whole. The victory was fleeting, followed by the cue ball closely behind. The tavern goes wild with cheers, whopping and hollering. None more so than Asha, rushing to embrace her champion. Phil extends his hand only to be left hanging. Instead is met with a flying right fist to his face. Beaten but not shaken, Phil withstood the initial blow, and countered with a combination of his own, catching the hustler unexpectedly, sending him falling backwards. "Oi! Take that outside, you two," the hefty-looking barman warns, reaching for the baseball bat. The warning goes unheeded. Muted by the adrenaline rushing through their veins, the two bulls locking horns. Getting to his feet, the hustler comes at Phil again, wrestling him over the pool table, pinning him on his back. The hustler struggles to hold him down, throwing misguided punches at him, striking the marble pool table as Phil dodged left and right. The remaining ball just beyond Phil's reach. Straining limbs, fingertips touch the ball and he rolls it into his hand, and is about to crack it across the skull of the hustler, when suddenly, from nowhere, a cue stick is broken across the hustler's back, winding him, and he falls away in pain. Asha stands back holding the broken stick in her hands. "Sorry." He gets like that when he loses. She apologizes. "That's okay." Pocketing his winnings, wiping the blood from a broken lip. "Be seeing you." She bids her farewell, and what could have been between them, pulling her man to his feet, and leads him away, propping up the broken hulk of the man that had tried to hustle him. The barman standing ready, with the baseball bat, happy to subdue any flare-ups. Phil watches the dream girl of his dreams wobble out the door. "Drinks are on me." Phil approaches the bar expecting to be welcomed as a hero. "You've been cut off," warns the barman. "Oh," moans Phil dejectedly. "Go home, sleep it off, Phil." The barman tells him to get going. "See ya, Phil," says Shan, biting her lip, imagining her own fantasies. "See ya, Shan." Phil limps from the bar and heads home. 50 extra quid in his pocket, and a broken lip to show for it. Michael watches Phil leave, unsure what to make of the young man that had also been chosen. The letter. Dawn broke again on Watford Terrace, and Arthur awoke yawning and stretching tired limbs. Like a fading dream, a feeling of déjà vu came over him, sending a chill and goosebumps over his body. "That's weird." Shaking himself of the peculiar feeling. "Breakfast, Artie?" His aunt calls out from the kitchen. "I'm coming." He calls back. The same cold breeze blew from the north, chasing the same postman, whistling the same annoying tune, pedaling frantically, trying to keep ahead of it, as if it too wanted him to stop whistling. Slowing down, reaches into a basket of letters, and pulled out 2 envelopes. "To today, Arthur," he declared, easing momentarily from whistling, passing them skillfully to Arthur, before carrying on his annoyingly whistling way. Being chased again by the rabid breeze snapping at his pedals. "2," remarked Arthur, trying to suppress his bewilderment. He examines the envelopes, recognizing the cheap brown envelope and the company's logo in the corner. The gas bill he had been expecting. Shuffling the letters, examined the second of the envelopes. A white envelope. Not a bill, but a letter. Handwritten, it was addressed to him, though the writing looked strangely familiar. He could not place it. Strange, who would write to me?" Arthur asked, taking in the oddity of the letter. He had not received a letter from anyone in what seemed like 100 years. Perhaps 2. A large red foreign stamp sirens its origin. European. He surmised, but he could not place it. Flipping it over, hoping to glean the sender's name. Blank. Hoping his aunt was not watching from the window, quietly folds the envelope and shoves it into a pocket. His aunt's inquisitive questions will have to wait. "Any mail today, Arthur?" his aunt enquired, appearing on the doorstep from nowhere. "Just the gas bill, auntie." Arthur half fibbed, returning inside and placing it on the dining table. Thoughts turned over as to how avoid his aunt's prying eyes from his letter. Then it dawned on him. "I'm just popping down to the cafe," he called out. "Do you need anything from the shops?" Hoping the answer would be no. "Pick up some more ginger cake. We're getting low. And some tea. The loose kind. Would you be a dear?" she asked, heading to the laundry. "No worries, auntie." Calling back, reaching for an overcoat. Wrapping an old blue university scarf about his neck, headed out the door. The day was nippy. He hated a lazy breeze that blew through him, then around him. Pulling a tired woolen beanie over ears. Buries his hands deep into the overcoat's pocket. The excursion to the cafe was an excuse to read his letter in private. There was another reason he wanted to visit the cafe. Zara. He was smitten with her, but lacked the courage to ask her out. Wondering if he should ask Phil for advice. Then quickly decided otherwise. He could pick up his aunt's grocery items afterwards. The cafe, a refreshing walk away from the solitary confinement of his bedroom. And the snooping eyes of his meddlesome, but lovable aunt. Zara's seductive smile made Arthur smile. Sandy brown hair halfway down her back. Hazel brown eyes that enchanted him. Hoping she would be working that day. And she was. Ding, a small bell above the cafe door rings his arrival. Zara looks up to see Arthur and smiles. He smiles back. Fumbling for words, talks about the inclement autumn weather. In a hope to prolong their momentary romantic relationship. "Regular latte, 1 sugar, right?" she asked just as he was about to order. "That's right." Taken back by her memory of his coffee. "Take a seat. I'll bring it over." She smiles at him. "Okay." He smiles back and with 2 left feet goes in search of a table. Finding a table by the window, and waited for the coffee to arrive. In a daze, stared out at the shoppers and passers-by. One day he would have the courage, like Phil, to ask her out. Maybe for a coffee. But then wondered if that was a good idea given how she served it all day. One day, he vowed. One day. Pushing a hand into a pocket, feels the envelope and remembers why he had come to the cafe. Pulling it out, re-examines it again. Just then, Zara arrives with his coffee, and places on the table beside the letter. "Thank you, Zara." Using her name as though it would personalize her. "You're welcome, Arthur." She smiled again. He watched her walking away to serve waiting customer. Taking a sip of the coffee, he savored the bitter caffeine against the sweetness of the sugar. The English cup of tea had its merits. But it was no match for coffee. Veins pumped with caffeine. Invigorating his senses, and resurrecting his spirit. Picking up the envelope, looks at the familiar handwriting. Still unable to place it. Like all date stamps, it was illegible, and the country unfathomable. East European perhaps. He deduces. A large building was portrayed in dark red ink. Not a church. A government building of some kind? Like Westminster. Only grander? Transfixed by the stamp, his mind running through the possibilities of countries, and wondered who he knew in Eastern Europe that would be writing to him. Turning it over, the sender's name had still not appeared. Running the leading edge of the teaspoon inside the envelope. Tears an opening to reveal a single piece of paper. Folded over. Removing the page, he opened it and began to read words he was not prepared for. Arthur, if you're reading this, you may endanger. That wrenched Arthur to attention more than the coffee had. Quickly looking to the bottom of the letter, he was not prepared for what he was about to read there as well. Dad. Now he recognized his father's handwriting. A chill came over him. Goosebumps ran up his shins. As though the cold north breeze had followed him inside the cafe. This must be one of Dad's jokes. Arthur thought, looking outside the cafe for his father who might be laughing at him. But all he could see were passers-by. The taste of the coffee was not feeling as pleasant as it had when he took his first sip. Nevertheless, he took another sip. Hoping to delay him from having to read the contents that would explain why the danger he was in. He scans the cafe and outside for suspicious eyes that may be watching him. Instinctively, he sank lower in his seat. As if this would avoid an assassin's bullet. His heart beating delexically in his chest with anxiety. What was this all about? There was only one way to find out. Taking another sip of coffee to calm himself. His eyes went to the top of the letter again. Arthur, if you're reading this, you may endanger. I will explain all when we meet. I need you to go to the attic. In the far corner you'll find a showbox. Take the contents and go to Budapest University. Find a Professor Olmish. He will tell you where to find me. There are people after me. And they may well be after you. Don't tell anyone, or you'll endanger them. We don't have much time. Trust me. Dad. It made no sense to Arthur. Budapest? That's in Hungary. That explained the stamp. Other than a few years in Edinburgh to study engineering, and a weekend to France, Watford was the size of Arthur's world. Hungary was half a world away. Constipated questions swamped his mind. Who was Professor Olmish? What's in the showbox in the attic? Was his father on the run from the law? Did he want to get involved? Was he already involved? All these questions went unanswered. Then there was his aunt, what would he tell her? Oh, by the way, Auntie. I'm just popping off to Budapest for a few days. Yeah, right. He thought to himself. His life already in tatters, being unemployed. How was he going to get to Budapest? He barely had enough money to buy coffee and ginger cake. Strangely, the thought of forgetting to buy his aunt's ginger cake was more fearful than the assassin's bullet that was about to explode his brains all over the cafe walls. Not leaving a good impression for Zara. Nor himself for that matter. Looking outside for a grassy knoll, decided it was safe for the time being. Carefully refolding letter, returned it to the envelope. To deny its existence and danger? Rocking quietly in the chair, as though to a tune in his head. perhaps now regretting the adventure he had longed for. Finishing the coffee stands and waves to Zara as he was leaving. "See you again soon, Arthur," she called out with a smile, infecting him and causing him to smile back. "Let's hope so, Zara. Let's hope so," he replied, unsure if anyone would see him again. Heading to the shopping center, grabbed a shopping basket from the green plastic pile. What did Auntie want? Trying to recite the shopping list. Ginger cake. Tea. Loose. Anything else? He thought, unable to concentrate. His father's letter causing him mental indigestion. He would Google the professor when he got home. But the universe does not work that way. You cannot Google God's grand design. You can only experience it one moment at a time. There are the chosen. Those with a divine purpose that keep the order from becoming chaos. Arthur, the unemployed civil engineer from Watford Terrace, had been chosen. Box in the attic. "I'm home, Auntie," called out Arthur, closing the front door behind him. Depositing the small shopping bag on the dining table. Placing the ginger cake away in a tin with the remains of the last cake. Refilling the tea tin with a fresh supply. His aunt appeared just as he finished unpacking. "Did you get the cake?" she inquired. "I've already put it away, Auntie." "That's a good boy," she replied as if he were still a child. "I'll put the kettle on." Keen to know what was in the shoe box, he had a thought of how to get into the attic. "I'm just popping up to the attic, Auntie. I need to find an old textbook. I won't be long. I think I know where it is," he said. "Don't make a mess up there. And brush the dust off before you come down. I've just vacuumed," his aunt warned him. "Will do, Auntie." No one actually knew what was up in the attic. It had been years since anyone had been up there. A forgotten graveyard of possessions and keepsakes. Arthur had no interest in those boxes. There was one particular box he did have an intense interest. A shoe box. On opening the ceiling attic door, stairs slide down into place, along with dust that settled on him and his aunt's clean carpet. Checking the stairs' sturdiness, climbs apprehensively through the opening into a semi-lit room. Light filtered through the large round grilled vent. He reaches for the light cord. Click, click. The bulb was dead and the small room remained in darkness. Must change that while I'm up here, he thought. If he recalled correctly, there were spare light bulbs on a shelf on the other side of the attic. Making his way between the boxes in the dimly lit room, eased his way to the shelf. Eyes becoming accustomed to the darkness. Making out a likely box that contained spare bulbs. Reached inside and fumbled for one. Exchanging the bulbs and placed the deceased bulb into a cardboard coffin for later burial. And returned to the light cord. "Let there be light," he pronounced. Click. Tugging on the cord. And there was light. Arthur glorified the known universe with brilliance, albeit the attic. Illuminated radiance replaced the darkness. Confronted by stacked boxes. Caked with years of dust. Boxes containing old photo albums and knickknacks. Memories of his mother. Boxes that would never be opened ever again. Boxes one could never part with. their contents their souls. In a far corner, behind several stacked boxes, he could make out the faint outline of the shoe box his father had spoken about his in letter. Dark shadows cloaked its presence, as though to veil it further. Shoved into the dark corner, covered in dust, but not as much as the other boxes. This had been a recent addition. Reaching into the corner, and carefully pulled it out, unsure of the frailty or its contents. Feeling the unusual way it contained not shoes, Arthur's curiosity deepened. String had been wrapped repeatedly around the box, and had been tied off in a heavy knot. Not a bow. The box was meant to remain closed, as if to keep what was inside from escaping, or those on the outside from peering inside. Nervously he untied the knot, unwound the string from around the box, placing the string next to the box of bulbs, as if performing a surgical autopsy. A gust of air breathed through the attic vent from outside, stirring up settled dust, creating skeletal fingers in the air as sunlight reached for him. Was it trying to prevent him from opening the box? This thought never entered his mind. His curiosity had gotten the better of him. R_the. What are you doing up there? Your lunch is almost ready. His aunt hollered from below the opening. It's okay, auntie. I'm just changing the light bulb. I'll be down in just a couple minutes. Hurry up, before it gets cold, the prying voice instructed. Yes, auntie. Hesitantly, lifts the lid of the shoebox, and was shocked by what he saw. His mind taking a moment to register the gun. More questions filled his head. Multi-choice would have been useful. What was a gun doing in this box? Who had put it there? Whose box was this? The immediate answer, his father. But his father was a traveling salesman. When does a salesman need a gun? What sort of clients did he deal with? Gangsters need stationery and tissue paper? Perhaps. His aunt was hardly a double agent. Head of a local drug cartel, he could accept. But a gun? It appeared familiar, as though he had seen it on television. The bulb threw a dark shadow of Arthur's body over the box. There was something laying underneath the gun. Carefully lifting it out, felt the weight. It felt awkward, and he places it carefully on the box's lid, as if not wishing to awaken it. Reaching within the shoe box again, discovered bundles of cash. British pounds and euros of 50 and 100 denominations. There must be tens of thousands in here, he thought. So much for not affording coffee and ginger cake anymore. Arthur. His aunt called out again. Her voice carried up the stairs so clearly it sounded like she was standing directly behind him. What are you doing up there? Your lunch is ready, come down at once. She ordered. Her coercing voice no less fearful than the contents of the shoes box. Yes, auntie. Sorry, auntie. Coming now, auntie. He answered, flustered. Carefully replacing the gun on top of the banknotes, replaced the lid. Rewinding the string around the box. Finishing it with a secure knot like his father had done. He slid the box far back into its dark hiding place. He would have to come back later. Was he really about to go to Budapest? Returning to the opening, Arthur switched off the light, and darkness fell again about the attic. Thin bony fingers of sunlight reached into the attic. Suspended dust danced on the shifting air. Climbing cautiously down the stairs brushes away any dust that may have hitched a ride. "Did you fix the bulb?" his aunt asked, wondering why he had taken so long. "Did you find the book you were after?" Machine gunning him with another question. "Yeah, fixed the bulb. But I couldn't find the book. It must be buried in one of the boxes somewhere. I'll have another look later." He lied, hoping that would end her inquisition. The letter and shoe box added to his loss of appetite. Lunch was not as appealing as it usually would be, if the gun had not disturbed him enough. The amount of cash that laid beneath certainly had. He tries to rationalize the gun and cash to his father's behavior. Nothing. With innate curiosity, his aunt could sense something was amiss with him. "You feeling okay, Artie? You've barely touched a bite. You're not coming down with something, are you? You look flush," she asked with concern. "I don't think so, Auntie. I must have had too much for breakfast. This is a lovely lunch." Forcing himself to take another mouthful. "A cup of tea would be lovely." A cup of tea was the British answer to everything, especially when it came to settling stomachs. That and ginger cake. Tea had gotten them through several world wars, though they had lost the American continent because of it. Perhaps things would have gone differently had it have been coffee, he wondered. Calmly sipping on the tea, he sat quietly with his aunt and watched the midday news. "Ginger cake, Artie?" she asked. "Oh, that would be lovely," he replied. Somewhere between the tea, the ginger cake, and the rerun on the television, Arthur formulated an excuse to tell his aunt as to how he could escape and not arouse her suspicions. "I had an email earlier from a friend saying that one of our old professors had just died. I was thinking about heading up to Edinburgh for the funeral. To show my respects," he began, hoping she had not been reading the Scottish obituaries in her spare time. "But I don't want to leave you here all alone," he added. "That's nice of you, Artie, how thoughtful. It will do you good to get out of the house for a while. Don't worry about me, I'll be fine." "How long will you gone?" she asked, taken back by his aunt's unreactive response to him leaving. Stunned, quickly calibrates the number of days. "Oh. I thought I might stay about a week. Might catch up with some old classmates, and all that." "That's a lovely thought, Artie. Make sure you pack something warm," she advised. "Yes, it will," Arthur replied, wondering. "I'll this afternoon. I want to catch up with Phil before I go," embellishing the excuse with some truth. "Will you have enough money?" "I can spare you some if you need," she offered. "Oh. I think I'm good for money, thanks, Auntie," he remarked. Very good, he thought. Michael sat opposite, unseen, enjoying his imagined tea and ginger cake, while watching a rerun of an old Monty Python show. "I like this one," chuckling to himself unheard. The cogs of Arthur's life were turning, forcing other cogs to turn with them. Deck of Cardinals. Somewhere in the Vatican. Several days earlier. In an opulent office void of sound, a second telephone rang a short interval after the first had been laid to rest, interrupting the man's mind from his thoughts or prayers, both indistinguishable from the other. A humble man of the most importance sat behind a large ancient wooden desk, just as his predecessors had centuries before him, deep in thought or prayer. The early morning rays reached for him, and he imagined the warm angelic fingers embracing him. He had not sinned. It was not his job to sin. He had served the church devoutly for decades, perhaps his whole life in one capacity then another. Now anointed to the highest office, God's representative on earth, the man let the intruding phone ring, answering to no one but God, the sound echoing off worn polished marble tiles, filling every square inch of the opulent office with an incessant ringing, as though ask, "Why do you forsake me?" The man eyes the defiant phone with suspicion. Who would be calling at this early hour? Who would be calling him? Reluctantly, the man lifts the handset from its cradle to terminate the siren, filling the opulent office once again with a deafening silence. "Salve," the man quietly answered in Latin. "Please excuse my intrusion, Your Eminence, but I have some very important news." Cardinal Cassini began to explain to his superior, the Pope. "Go on." Now recognizing the Cardinal's voice. "We have a situation I think you should be aware of," advised Cassini in a grave tone. "A place at the Pope repeated, slipping back into Latin. The Cardinal relayed details of the relic's discovery. The ecclesiastic significance recognized immediately. It was without question that it would need to be returned to the church. A relic. The first? I see, repeating the word to confirm what he had heard. Go on, my friend. Hoping the call was not being monitored by outsiders. Nodding to himself, acknowledging the relic's importance, and the steps that would need to be undertaken to secure its return. Do what you must do to return the relic to the bosom of the church. Sit Angeli Custodite, may the angels protect you. Blessing the Cardinal before hanging up. The early autumn morning light shone through the tall open arched windows. Embroidered lace curtains projected twirling shadows of angels across the black and white marbled floor. The Bishop of Rome sat at the stately desk, tapping his fingers, tapping on the ancient surface, as if to keep beat to the dancing angels on the floor. Tap tap tap, tap tap tap. His mind was deep in thought. Like the Cardinal, he knew there would be others who would seek the holy prize, more for prestige than its intrinsic value. Braun, a name surfaced among his thoughts. Wondering how far he would go to possess such a relic. Other names bubbled to the surface, each as devious and ruthless as the other. Hoc non est bonum, muttered to himself. This is not good at all. Holy fingers continued to tap upon the holy desk of the holy predecessors. Then the tapping stopped. Silence once again filled the room, as a decision came to mind. As if it were his own. He would summon the cardinals, and advise them of the situation. He would take measures that were necessary to repatriate the founding relic to the church. Be it by an act of God if need be. Cassini would be afforded all resources and means to coordinate its return. It. So be it. Vocalizing the thought and crossing himself. Within the hour of the second phone call, cardinals had gathered in the large meeting room. Trimmed with gold braids, long dark purple drapes hung heavily from tall ancient windows. The walls hung with portraits of former cardinals and bishops of Rome. The room cool with the early morning air still lingering. Cardinals circulated among themselves, moving slowly about the room as they conversed and nodding to one another as they did so. Without warning, the sound of large heavy wooden doors creaked slowly opened. Nothing moved very fast at the Vatican. Even the sun's rays were taking their time to reach this room. Haste was not in the holy vocabulary. Urgency, on the other hand, was. And never the two shall meet. The Pope entered the room to a series of ritual bows and nods. Like the Red Sea, cardinals parted as he walked to the head of a large table, and waited for him to be seated before sitting themselves. "Thank you for coming at such short notice. I have had word of a pressing matter that concerns the Church." The Pope began solemnly, his tone betraying the significance of the meeting. He paused to gather his thoughts, then continued. "I have been informed that a certain English gentleman will soon be in possession of a unique holy relic." As if to whet the cardinal's ecclesiastical appetites, causing an immediate mumbled chatter among the cardinals before returning their eyes to their bishop for confirmation. "I have this on good authority from Cardinal Cassini, whom you all know for his services to the Church," accentuating the word services, as if it did not need further qualifying. They all knew of the Cardinal. They all knew of his services to the Church, none of whom wished their paths to cross. "Cardinals," the Pope began again, "I understand the holy relic is a fisherman's ring. The first of its kind. St. Peter's," he confessed, relieved to have lifted the burden from his shoulders. An audible inhalation of gasps circulated the large table as the significance of the founding rings sunk into aging minds. "What can we do?" one cardinal asked. "Let us pray," exclaimed another. Ritual nods circulated the large table among the novice cardinals, countered by a shaking of the heads among the more senior cardinals. "Yes, prayer would be helpful. But I am thinking of a more earthly solution," the Pope advised, looking down to Cassini sitting passively beside him. Cassini eyed the dilapidated deck of cardinals about the table, wondering which to keep, which to throw out. Not all cardinals were created equal. He had been in the service of Church longer than he cared to remember, and would remain so until summoned by a higher being. Eyes scanned for cardinals that appeared out of place, stopping at an elderly cardinal, sitting quiet, as though frozen in time. The only cardinal not to have made eye contact with him. Cardinal Dovizi, senior in years, rising him above suspicion of recent Vatican scandals, but not above Cassini's. "I have placed Cardinal Cassini in charge of returning the ring to the Church. You are to give him your full support when called upon." This was not a request, but a direct holy order. The Pope promulgated the authority. Heads nodded in ritual bows. Smudged voices discussed their concerns. Standing, the Pope blessed the deck of cardinals before dismissing them back from whence that had come. A sea of red regalia parted again to allow the Bishop of Rome to pass through the slowly opening creaking wooden doors. Swiss guards stood either side in their vivid uniforms. their polished halberds ready to fall on the necks of those that trespassed the ancient Hallow halls. Cassini remained behind, and watched as the other cardinals leave in pairs, eyeing a lonely individual that lagged behind the others, reluctant to pair up with another. Cardinal Doversey. Safety in numbers. Sitting in his father's chair, Arthur stared out the window to the quiet suburban street outside, contemplating the journey that laid ahead. Could he go blindly into the unknown? His mind was a blank canvas as to what laid ahead. He had often wished for an adventure like his father's travels across Europe, never expecting it to be so sudden, so dangerous. But then what adventure is not dangerous? What was the danger his father spoke of? Enough to require a gun? The reality of the gun slapped him across the face, awakening him to the seriousness of his father's words. His mind plays out scenarios. He needed to get to Budapest. Money was not an issue. Plane or train? Security checks. X-rays would detect the gun, followed by a lot of questions for which he had no answers. Flying was out of the question. That only left trains. It would take an extra day, but it would provide more places to conceal the gun, more room to maneuver, more opportunity to exit the train if required. Settled, trains it would be. Then contemplated if he buy his tickets online, or as he went. Who were these people that were after him? Were they sophisticated enough to trace tickets like the CIA? He was Arthur McGee, not Jason Bourne. His life was in Watford, not in some remote coastal village in India. Were they watching him now? Waiting for his next move? Looking to the lace curtains, as afternoon sunlight filtered into his bedroom, casting dancing shadowed angels dancing over the floor. The idyllic scene, behaving the darker dangers that lay in wait outside. Nah. Not in Watford, Arthur thought to himself. But if Arthur had looked past the shadow angels dancing, he would have spied a small grey Humber that blended into the curb, much like the driver, that blended into the upholstery of the seat. Unnoticed. Invisible. He was a patient man. If anyone stopped to question him, he would say he was clergy from Italy to visiting their English brethren. If troubled, he would speak Italian or Latin, thereby frustrating any conversation. If troubled further, Cassini had a solution in his pocket that would silence the matter, appearing of no importance to anyone. He would pass under everyone's the radar. Even the prying eyes of Arthur's watchful aunt could not detect the Cardinal's presence. Arthur googled Budapest University Professor Ormish, and waited less than half a second before the search listing came back, revealing the professor was connected to the Department of Historical Antiquity. That doesn't sound like office supplies. Unless he's a client, thought Arthur, trying to make sense of his father's instructions. But then, neither did the gun. Despite his father's warning not to tell anyone, he wondered if he should visit to Phil. Perhaps getting him to play along with his visit to Edinburgh, cementing his alibi with his aunt. They had been mates since Edinburgh, and were like peas and carrots. It would be wrong not to tell him. Phil lived 2 streets over. Like Arthur, he had been laid off at the council, and lived at home with his parents. Arthur knocked on the door. "Hello, Arthur," said Phil's mother. "How have you been? I haven't seen you in ages." "I'm good, Mrs. replying cheerfully. "I was wondering if Phil was home." "Come on in, Arthur. Would you like a cup of tea?" she inquired. Phil_lip. "Are you up there, love? Hollering up the stairway?" "What's up, Mon?" A holler tumbled back down. "Arthur is here to see you." She hollered back. "Send him up, thanks, Mon." "Thank you, Mrs. I'll go on up," said Arthur, heading inside. "Call out if you'd like a cup of tea," she offered again. "Will do, Mrs. climbing the narrow stairs to Phil's room. Arriving at his bedroom door, takes in a room was unchanged from since he was a teenager. Which was questionable how long ago that was. Rock posters adorn the painted walls. A well-arranged shelf of old vinyl LPs. Phil sat at a desk surfing the net. "What you up to?" asked Arthur, trying to peer over his shoulder. "Nothing much. Just surfing," quickly changing the page as he got closer. "You?" Turning about, showing his face. His sirening a recent fight. "Whoa. What happened to your lip?" exclaimed Arthur, taken back by the abrasion. "Cut myself shaving," deflected Phil, grinning. "Yeah, right. Those safety razors can be dangerous." Arthur hated to think what the other guy looked like. "So what brings you here?" Phil asked curiously. "Not much," pausing as he thought of what he wanted to say, or how to say it. "Well, actually, something has come up and I need your help." "What you been up to? Is it a woman?" he asked, hoping to expel his wisdom upon him. The amount of which could be written on the back of a postage stamp. Which, not to be unfair to Phil, was generally more than most men knew about women. "A woman?" "No," hesitant to continue. "Come on. Spill the beans," ribbing him to get on with it. "I don't know how much I can tell you. I shouldn't be telling you any of this. I've been told not to. It could put you in danger as well," he said cautiously, before realizing he had already said too much. If ever there was a hook to catch Phil's attention, it was the word danger. "Danger? How can you ever be in danger? You live in Watford, for God's sake, Arthur. Besides, Danger is my middle name." Phil joked. "Yeah. Though sometimes I wonder if it should be your first." "Not joking. So what's happened to get you into trouble?" "You haven't robbed a bank, have you?" he asked. "Well, actually, I don't know." He thought about the money in the box. "If I tell you, you have to swear not to tell anyone, okay?" "What do you mean you don't know?" "You either did or you didn't," responded Phil. Realizing something was troubling Arthur, Phil went to the door and closed it quietly, and looked at him with a solemn look on his face. "All right, big guy. Spill the beans and don't hold anything back. Half a story won't do, okay?" Taking a more serious tone. "I had a letter from my father," Arthur began. "It's a woman, isn't it?" Quick to surmise the problem. "No. It's not about women. Not everything is about women, Phil. Sorry, mate. I just thought." "Go on, I won't interrupt again." "I had a letter from my father," He said I may be in danger. Said I should go to Budapest. Budapest? Phil exclaimed, surprised. Wait, there's more. Said I should see a professor there. Ormish. Told me not to tell anyone. Or I will put them in danger. Informed Arthur, relieved to have now told Phil. Reaching into his pocket, and pulled out the letter to corroborate his story. Passing it to Phil, who opened it and read it to himself. His face became grave and lifted his eyes to Arthur's. Shit. You weren't joking? So what was in the box? He inquired. Money, Arthur paused. And a gun. A gun? Exclaimed Phil again. Cheeky. The money sounds well and good. But what is your father doing with a gun? Becoming entangled in the same knotted thoughts Arthur had had. The pair sat looking blankly at each other, taking in the obscure facts. So what you going to do? Phil asked, handing the letter back to him. I have to go. My father wants me there. He seems to think I'll be safer there than staying here. He reasoned aloud. Who's this professor? Ormish. I did a search for him, and it seems he has something to do with history and antiquity at Budapest University. So I guess Dad is tied in with him somehow. I thought your father was a traveling salesman. When did he become a secret agent? Cool _ Joked Phil. Arthur tried to restrain himself from laughing but could not help it. Phil managed to release the anxiety that had been building within him. Yeah, he chuckled, a grin forming on his face. How you going to get to Budapest without your aunt knowing? I've told her I'm heading up to Edinburgh for a funeral of an old professor. Oh, that's a good story, mate. I'd be proud to think of that one. So, when do we leave? Not one to be left out. We? Arthur looked at Phil. You can't come. I can't get you caught up with this, pleaded Arthur. Danger is my middle name, remember? Besides, you'll need someone handy with a gun. I'll be your wingman. 4 eyes are better than 2. I can watch your back while you're watching mine. Safety in numbers, mate, said Phil, exhausting most of the clichés he knew, and waited for Arthur to accept his invitation. I suppose you're right. If you don't mind being killed along the way. Arthur half joked. Mate, they have to get through me to get to you, warned Phil. Somehow Arthur knew he meant it. No one got past Phil without a bruising to show for their troubles. You won't regret it, mate. He grinned, excited by the journey. Yeah. That's what I'm afraid of. There's a train leaving Street Pancras for Brussels at 10 tomorrow morning. Don't worry about money. There seems to enough for several round trips. I've sorted a rough itinerary that should see us in Budapest in a couple days. Bring your identity card and passport for the border checkpoints. Can't we simply fly there? Asked Phil. Not with a gun as hand luggage, mate. Arthur reminded him. Oh yeah. Security doesn't like that sort of things these days. I forgot. It will add a day. But we'll get there. You sure you still want to go? You don't have. Mate. I wouldn't let you go without me, responded Phil. Yeah, Somehow I thought you'd say that. I'll see you tomorrow morning. My place by 9, okay? We'll get a taxi to the station. Cover story, you're coming to Edinburgh for a week for a funeral of an old professor. Informs Arthur. See you tomorrow morning, mate. I've got to get back for dinner before my aunt calls out a search party, said Arthur, heading down the stairs. Arthur got home just before the alarm be raised, and settled in for dinner with his favorite aunt before leaving into the unknown, to a man he did not know, in country he had only ever read about, half a world away, informing his aunt that Phil had decided to accompany him to Edinburgh. That's nice. Safety in numbers, she suggested. Yeah. Safety in numbers. And who better than Phil, right, auntie? He replied, playing alone. After the habitual cups of tea, ginger cake and television reruns, Arthur excused himself to bed. Usually he would read a few pages before he slept, but tonight his book would serve another purpose. Placing the letter between the open pages, reread the brief letter. Perhaps there was something he had missed between the lines, between the words. Go to Budapest. Find Professor Ormish. His mind erupting with fantasies of spies and espionage, that soon evaporated when his aunt appeared at his door. You okay, auntie? You look tired, she asked. I'm fine, thanks, auntie, just getting into the book, he fibbed. Don't stay up too late. You have a big trip tomorrow. Get some sleep. Sweet dreams. You too, auntie. He could hear her down the hallway, floorboards creaking underfoot. I don't think I'll be having sweet dreams tonight, he thought. Had he made a mistake telling Phil, going against his father's directions? Arthur's weakness was Phil's strength, complementing the other. He was coming along, wanted or not. Closing the laptop and book, placing them on the side table, and switches off the bedside lamp. The room flooded with a darkness, subtly illuminated by the growing full moon outside, tinged with a faint red glow. Somewhere between puzzling thoughts and searching questions, a tiredness overcame him, as though not his own. Sleep, commanded Michael, standing at the end of the bed unseen, sending Arthur into a peaceful sleep, deeper than he had ever slept before. Cardinal Doversey. Heads nodded in ritual bows, smudged voices discussed their concerns. Upon standing, the Pope raised a hand and blessed the deck of cardinals, dismissing them back from whence that had come. A sea of red regalia parted to allow the Bishop of Rome to pass through. Cardinals moved unhurriedly through the large doorway, discussing among themselves the implications of the finding. The deck shuffled, split itself and dealt the cardinals in different directions of the Vatican compass, paired off as if by some primal mating ritual. Except for one lone cardinal, Cardinal Bernardo Doversey. As within any society, there is good and evil, moral and immortal. The Vatican was no exception. Doversey was no exception. Of senior years, he had clung to his elected position as he did to life. Through the decades he had made associations with people and organizations around the world. Some reputable, some less so. Some had grown into friendships. The line between good and evil had become blurred, perhaps smudged at times. We all have friends less moral than ourselves. Yet we still find ourselves associating with them. Somehow they complete us. Dovizy too had friends less moral than himself. While the Pope and the Church fulfilled the one half, the less moral associates fulfilled the other. Too old to be concerned moralities anymore. Too old to be elected Pope. Forgave himself the few digressions that befell his ordained position while in his final years on God's earth. Having served many popes in his time, this tenure may well be his last. An opportunity had presented itself on the silver, and friends that would reward him favorably should the relic fall into their possession. A quiet word to help them in the right direction. There would be no blood on Dovizy's hands. Shuffling unhurriedly to his office along a labyrinth of marbled passageways, eternally long hallways, with eternally high ceilings, long winding staircases, draped with royal red carpet, held in place by polished brass bars, accentuating each step. Beams of morning sunlight shone through the towering windows. Standing like sentinels looking down upon the diminutive figure shuffling along the corridor. They had been watching him for many years. There was an unspoken code. What happens in the Vatican, stays in the Vatican. The sentinels allowed the Cardinal to pass. His secret was safe. For now. Before closing the door of his ancient office, Dovizy about the corridor to ensure he was alone. Staff would not arrive for another half hour. Lowering himself gently into a large wooden chair, upholstered in red leather. Brass tack heads rimmed the edges. Surveyed his desk of neatly stacked arranged piles of paper. A thorough man. Organized, he liked things in their place. Opening a drawer, removed a small plastic box of business cards. Reaching for a tired pair of reading glasses, wedged them on his nose. Hooking bent wire limbs behind large ears. Removing cards, thumbed through them as if he was playing bridge. Contemplating those to keep. Those to discard. He was searching for two in particular. Hesitating. Read the card in front of him. Voices in his head debated what to do next. Would he? Would he not? The question as to should he? Never entered his mind. Minutes had passed in what seemed like a moments, as he stared in contemplation at the business card. Taking a deep breath, annuls the growing anxiety. And reaches for the telephone. Lifting the heavy large green handpiece. Confident the call would not monitored. In all his years at the Vatican not once had he heard a case of a telephone being monitored. Nonetheless, it was a risk he was prepared to take. The man on the other end of the line also took risks. Poking bony fingers at buttons, punched numbers from the illicit card into the green phone. And waited for it to be answered. It rang several times before a voice answered by a man enjoying breakfast in the shade of the pergola hanging with vines. Large stone lions watched from the corners of the courtyard. Cardinal Dovizy. How are you, my good friend? What can I do for you? Sang out a joyful voice. How did you know it was me, my good friend? Enquired the Cardinal apprehensively. Caller ID, my friend. Isn't wonderful? The man laughed. I can tell who's calling. It is good to hear from you, pausing momentarily, somewhat knowing the purpose of the call. "You have something for me today?" he voiced eagerly. The voice was that of Don Marconi, an unscrupulous relic collector. In particular, religious relics. Already holding several of the Cardinal's informed pieces in his private collection, and was always interested in more. Although highly illegal pursuit, Marconi's connections with authorities afforded him protection from meddling righteous eyes. On the Isle of Capri, Naples, resided on a remote hilltop hideaway, Villa San Michele. Panoramic views of the town of Capri and its harbor. Mount Vesuvius laid sleeping in the distance. The former chapel, dedicated to San Michele, reputedly built on the ruins of Roman Emperor Tiberius' villa, now a forgotten relic to the outside world. A fitting residence for the illicit relic collector. Towering 300 meters above sea level, and over 1,000 steps. Few ever ventured there. Rediscovered by a young Swedish physician, at the turn of the last century. It is said the physician made a pact with the devil to acquire the property. The villa had passed through a series of socialites, and eventually on to Don Moroni. Though he had not made a pact with the devil, was about to enter into a pact with the next best thing. Cardinal Dovizzi. "I have news, there is a relic. The first of its kind." Dovizzi served the appetizer cold. "We will need to act quickly to secure it." Most interesting. Do we know what it is?" Marconi asked curiously. A fisherman's ring, the Cardinal paused to allow its importance to register. "The Church is very, very keen to have it returned," he added, tempting Marconi further. "I understand they would." "The first of its kind, you say?" St. Peter's himself, Dovizzi qualified the find, then as if soured the sweet Marconi was saving, adds, "Cardinal Cassini is charged with its return." "Cassini, did you say?" Marconi grumbled his distaste for the Cardinal. Their paths had crossed in the past, barely escaping with his life. The relic must be prized by the Church to send Cassini after it. Preferring now to remain in the shadows, he had men that would do his dirty work, and settle his score with Cassini. Marconi sighs heavily. The prize was too great to let slip from his fingers. "Thank you, my dear friend. You won't go unrewarded," enticing the Cardinal. "Keep me informed. I'll be in contact again soon." "Goodbye, my friend," replied Dovizzi, ranging up. "Caller ID?" What was that? I must be more careful, thought Dovizzi. The electronic age had overtaken the Cardinal, who never had the time nor energy to catch up. Strange words and jargon associated with the new technology. And he wondered if his Latin was slipping. He would find out more for his friend on the Isle of Capri. Having never visited the place, he thought it would be nice to go one day. Maybe when all this was over. Before he got much older than he already was. The 1,000 steps to the top may well be his last. The Cardinal would have work to do if he wanted to locate the ring. Nothing moved quickly in the Vatican. Particularly the paperwork. Vatican secretaries talked to each other, and it was not impossible to know what was happening in another cardinal's intrays. What happens in the Vatican did not always stay in the Vatican. Cardinal Dovizi replaced Don Marconi's card among the other cards and thought. Cassini was a formidable opponent for the most determined relic collector. If Marconi should fail, then another opportunity that may not present itself in his short remaining lifetime. Dovizi needed insurance. Thumbing the cards in his hands, shuffles them until he encounters the next he was in search of. Julius Augustus Braun. Marconi and Braun were fierce rivals. Competition will lift their game, thought the Cardinal. Ensuring his payday. Examining the number carefully on the card, as though to memorize it. Dialed the numbers slowly. The man he was calling operated outside the law. Braun was a mysterious man of substantial wealth, with tacit connections with many of the industrialists and their wives, having an origin into which no one dared to inquire. He had risen from the ashes of the Second World War. Braun, whose father was unknown or unspoken of, had taken his mother's maiden name. Undeclared family wealth, amassed in Swiss bank accounts and vaults, providing the capital to create an even greater fortune from the less fortunate. Ruthlessly, Braun climbed from the rumble left by the Allied bombings, forging a dynasty of industrial wealth and power. A new world order was forming, and his family name would be among the elite. His son Augustus being groomed to succeed him. Braun had an insatiable appetite for religious relics. As if to possess them would make him closer to God. As if to possess them would absolve his father's unforgivable sins. The phone sounded in Braun's spacious office. The polished wooded floors and high ceiling did little to mollify the ringing, distracting Braun from the day's stock prices and trades. He had two phones on his desk. One for business, the other for private. A select few had his private number, and those that did were people connected to power. Wealth is nothing without power to protect it. Braun answered the latter. Braun speaking. Intrigued as to who was calling. My apologies if I have disturbed you, Senior Braun. He humbled himself. Cardinal Dovizi. What a delightful surprise. It's been a while since we last talked. Hope you are well. Recognizing the Cardinal's distinctive Italian accent and aging voice. I am well, thank you for asking. As are you, I hope. How is Augustus? I am well. Though the years are catching up. Augustus is well. Too much energy for me to keep up with, I'm afraid. You bring me good news, my friend. Braun came to the point. I have news that may interest you, Senior Braun. He began. Go on. You have my attention, my friend. There has been a recent discovery of a ring. The first of its kind. St. Peter's ring. Dovizi waited for Braun to respond. A silence came over Braun as he registered the relic's importance. He knew of the fisherman's ring, but unaware of St. Peter ever having one. A chill ran over his body at the thought that Christ himself had given the disciple the ring, bestowing him the keys of heaven. Braun held several notable, yet questionable, relics. Alleged nails from Christ's crucifixion. A sliver of wood from the cross itself. St. Peter's ring would be second only to the Holy Grail. Tell me more. Braun spoke, restraining the flame of desire that burned fiercely inside him. Cardinal Cassini has been charged with its return. I will know more by the end of the day. He advised what he knew. Cassini's name always arose fear in relic collectors' minds. None less so than Braun's. Cassini. Damn. Forgive me, Cardinal. Braun cursed, knowing the lengths Cassini would go. Wishing Cassini worked for him and not the Vatican. I understand, Senior Braun. Cardinal Cassini can be an annoyance, but nothing we can't keep a step ahead of, Dovizzy soothed Braun's doubts. Yes, yes. Of course. I'll be in contact once I have more information, advised the Dovizzy. Thank you, Cardinal. I look forward to your next call. Good day. Braun hung up the phone to contemplate the worth of the find. Financially and spiritually. Contemplating Cassini's involvement. Their paths had crossed before. With Braun's men always coming away worse for wear. Or dead. Cassini was a thorn in his side that needed to be removed. He would see to it personally himself this time. Dovizzy hung up the phone. Pleased he had satisfied his two masters. Reshuffling Braun's card among the others, and returned the small plastic box to his drawer. Just as the office doors opened and staff arrived for the day. Advising the secretaries of the mission Cassini was to undertake and that they should provide whatever assistance was required. They were to glean from Cassini's staff the location of the ring and report back to him. Inferring he would be assisting the Cardinal in his quest to repatriate the ring. As to whom the ring would be repatriated to was another matter. Sunlight beamed through the tall windows, illuminating Dovizzy like a spotlight. As though the finger of God had caught him trespassing. Feeling uncomfortable, Dovizzy eased his chair into the shadows. Looking back to window as though someone was watching him. Quod enim tail faceria potue? What have I done? The Cardinal mutters in Latin before crossing himself. A twinge of guilt in a form of goosebumps ran over his body. Indeed, said Michael, watching on unseen from a chair across from him. Ginger cake and tea. Arthur had sent Phil a text message, instructing him to distract his aunt to the garden while he accessed the attic and retrieved the contents of the shoebox. Despite routine habits, Arthur's aunt was highly unpredictable as a seagull at Brighton Beach on a windy day. Though not a seagull, she was however a passionate gardener. Unfortunately for Phil, could not tell a weed from a chrysanthemum. With the distraction organized, Arthur waited on Phil and finalized the itinerary. Traveling as backpackers. Eating on the go. Keeping a low profile from whoever may, or may not be after him. He was beginning to realize he knew very little about his father. The slate had been wiped clean with the discovery of the gun. A new identity was being etched. What that identity was would be clearer when he got to Budapest and had spoken with Professor Olmisch. Doubting his father would be there as well by the way the letter was written. If not there, then where was he? The question perplexed him further, deepening the mystery as to what he had gotten himself into. Phil arrived earlier than expected, keen to get underway. He had brought a cutting from his mother's garden. "Good morning, Auntie," said Phil affectionately. "My mother asked me to give you this." Offering a cutting of an unknown specimen. "Why, that's lovely, Philip. Tell your mother thank you very much. Just put it down over there." She replied, pointing to an old newspaper on top of a box in the corner. "She told me you have a lovely garden." I would so like to see it before I headed off with Arthur. Sounding slightly awkward. Oh, the garden is a bit of a mess at the moment. I've just pulled much of it out. There isn't much left to see really. Not until next spring, she responded. The rejection spoiling Arthur's plans. Watching in shock as his strategy fell apart. His mind went blank. There was no plan B, just plan Phil. Meanwhile Phil was thinking he had been shot down again. By Arthur's aunt of all people. Then like an unpredictable regulation issue aunt. Be a dear, help me carry the washing basket out back for me. The clothes won't hang themselves. Yes, of course. I would love to, said Phil, his eyes lighting up, looking over his shoulder to Arthur. Shaking his head in disbelief. You're a sweet boy, aren't you? Complimented Auntie as if Phil was 8 years old. Followed her out to the clothes line in the backyard. Indicating to Arthur he should retrieve the box. Watching the pair disappear through the back door. Arthur rushed up the stairs and pulled down the attic ladder. And climbed quickly to the attic holding a duffel bag. Morning sunlight streamed through the vent, providing some visibility. Through the grills could see his aunt and Phil below chatting and hanging up the washing. No time to stand around, he thought. Without turning on the light, found the box and untied the knot and opened it. No surprises this time. Taking out the gun. Feeling its weight. Was it loaded? He would have to assume it was. Phil may know. He was gun savvy. But he was also supposed to be women savvy too. Doubts crisscrossed his mind. Carefully placing the gun in the duffel bag. Soon followed by the bundles of bank notes. For some unknown reason, after closing the box, rooted the box and returned it back to its hiding place. Nothing was to be out of place. Looking out the vent, he could not see Phil nor his aunt. Throwing the duffel bag over his shoulder, and scampered down the stairs quicker than he had climbed them. Returning the ladder to the ceiling, closed the attic door. Catching his breath, turned about just as his aunt appeared from around the corner. You okay, Auntie? You looked flushed, Aunt inquired. You feeling okay? I'm fine, thanks, Auntie. Just a little tired. You sure you're not coming down with something? His aunt asked with concern. I'm good, thanks, Auntie. Phil and I must be off. Our train leaves at 10. We'll get a taxi to the Paddington station. Wishing to get away quickly. Don't we need to go to Street Pancras? Phil corrected Arthur. Then realized where he was not going. And corrected himself. No, that's right, Paddington. Silly me. It's been such a while since I caught a train. Would they ever be able to escape the house and the clutches of his aunt? But Arthur's aunt was not listening. She had put the kettle on and was reaching for the ginger cake. Have a cuppa before you go. Won't you? She asked, hoping to prolong their company. Let me help with that. Phil offered. It was the least he could do for his slip of tongue, thankfully passing over Aunt's head. We could stay for a cuppa, can't we, Arthur? Phil played along. I suppose we could have a quick one while we wait for the taxi to arrive. That would be lovely, Auntie. Phil, you must try the ginger cake. It's to die for. Jested Arthur. I would love some. replied Phil boldly. "Thought you'd say that," said Arthur. Auntie poured 3 cups of tea, and offered ginger cake to the 2 unlikely lads about to embark unknown to her upon a mysterious journey across Europe, to a country they knew very little about. That did not trouble Phil. Nothing ever did. Between Wikipedia and a half-dozen dating sites, he was a wealth of knowledge. With his laptop he could Google himself around the world. His knowledge of women, however, was limited. As was Wikipedia for that matter. Cardinal Cassini. Cardinal Cassini was an inconspicuous cardinal. He liked it that way. Few questions are ever asked of someone who did not exist. He belonged to a forgotten arm of the Vatican that no one thought actually existed. As the world's oldest organization, the Vatican has used a secret spy service to carry out its holy will. The entity, sometimes called the Holy Alliance, it has shaped world history for the past 5 centuries. Popes have played an invisible hand over the centuries by using the scared holy organization to assassinate kings, kidnappings, launder money, protect war criminals, persecute, colonize, financing civil and world wars. All in the name of God. In recent times it had softened its position on wars, assassination, persecution and colonization. The entity's motto, "With the cross and the sword." Cassini was very familiar with the earthly justice the Vatican's secret service dispensed. Having seen service in many countries, protected by diplomatic immunity should he ever be caught. Though now into his 60s, he was still called on from time to time for assignments that required his expertise, blending into a crowd as though he were not there. No one noticed an old man. Yet the old man noticed everyone and everything around him, carrying a Beretta in one pocket and a Bible in the other, prepared to use both to the monstrous demons that threatened the Church's dogma, preferring to operate alone. On this assignment he had been instructed an assistant will travel with him, a novice. Their duty, to assist the Cardinal and dispatch reports back to Rome. Any blood would be spilt would be on the Cardinal's hands, and not the innocent. The choice of recruit came from the Cassini himself. As we have seen, not all choices are our own. The Cardinal had several candidates in mind, then at the last moment, a candidate came to mind from nowhere, as if it had been planted. The thought became so firm in the Cardinal's mind, that he possessed it as his own. Father Francis of Amanti. Cassini ordered his secretary to dispatch the invitation immediately, then realized how very little he knew of the father from the far southern parish. Something told him it was the right decision. And like a dream, lingering doubts faded. A sealed letter had been personally dispatched requesting the father's presence at the Vatican. Cassini patiently waited for the arrival of the new recruit. Michael sat quietly beside him. Francis of Amanti. In a small southern Italian town of Amanti, the parish bell rang. It rang to signal midday, as it had for the past 500 years. And would continue with God's grace, for another 500 years. Francis was preparing a sermon in the chapel, when a papal dispatcher appeared at old wooden church gates requesting to see him immediately. With him he had a personal letter from a Cardinal Cassini. The dark blood red wax seal stamped with a relief of a cross and sword. This meant little to Francis, and reluctantly broke the seal, and opened the envelope. unfolding the embossed parchment, and read the handwritten message. The letter instructed him to come to the Vatican immediately, stating he had been chosen to assist the Cardinal on his travels to London, England. A train would soon be leaving from the local station within the hour. Further instructions would be given when he arrived. England? Francis thought. Cardinal Cassini. He had never been to England, nor had ever wished to go, having heard from passing English tourists as being a cold, damp place, preferring the warm, dry climate of southern Italy. Nonetheless, this was a rare opportunity for him. To be chosen by the Vatican. One could overlook a bit of dampness to please a senior cardinal. And the Pope himself. To be called to the Vatican, to be among his peers, was an honor few clergy ever got to experience in a lifetime. It was as if being asked to step closer to God himself. Francis began to pack clergy garments and civilian clothes, packing his small leather suitcase with what little he had. 1:05 p.m. a ticket was waiting for him at the tired station. Climbing aboard an old train that had seen better years. It would take him on the 5-hour journey north to Rome, and found himself an empty compartment. There came the sound of a whistle, and a voice calling out the train's imminent departure. Sliding the suitcase on the upper luggage rack, took a seat beside the window, and looked out onto township that was Amante. He had never seen it from this vantage point, and took in its simplicity and beauty, spying the belfry of his parish in the distance. And he pondered when he would be returning. There was no mention in the Cardinal's letter. Michael sat opposite unseen and grinned as to Francis' thoughts. All aboard, a voice called from the platform. Released pressure hissed and steam bellowed into the air outside, sending a sudden cloud of fog over the platform. The train lurched forward, stuttered, and then lurched again, fidgeting to get comfortable on the hard bench seat as the train steadied its motion. Bewildered as to why he had been chosen for the assignment, could only speculate that his work at Amante had been recognized, that somehow they thought him worthy to assist the Cardinal. But who was this Cardinal? Francis had never heard of him before. Nothing had appeared on the search he had made on him before he had left the parish. It was as though he did not exist, and guessed there some places not even Google's spiders could not find their way into. The Vatican servers being one of them. Arriving in Rome just after 6 that evening if the train to timetable. Pulling out a paperback he had been trying to finish for months. He settled in for the long journey north. The Italian coastline rushing unhurriedly past the window. The sun shone its brilliance upon the idyllic coastline that was ordinary to him, spectacular to the droves foreign tourists. Carriages rattled and rocked gently side to side. And somewhere between the rhythmic rocking and the pages of the paperback, Francis drifted to sleep. A passing conductor came to the cabin and found him sleeping with a book on his lap. His head leaned against the window. Spying the edge of the red train ticket being used as a bookmark, quietly leant over and punched a neat hole in a corner of it, and let him sleep uninterrupted. The train continued its journey northwards, along the seaside tracks, through long dark tunnels, all the while rocking Francis in the cradle. He would need his rest for the mysterious assignment installed for him, not only by the Cardinal, but the divine hand of God. He too had been chosen. Traveling north. Stopping at the stations along the historic Roman route. A passenger boarded the train, entered Francis' compartment, and sat opposite. He too was clergy. Of a sort. He too was on his way to the Vatican. Michael waited patiently for Francis to be awoken. St. Pancras Station. It was a typical dreary autumn day in dreary North London. Grey streets smudged with the grey buildings that smudged into the grey autumn skies above them. The lazy cold breeze blew from the north. The sun trying to breach the blanket of thick clouds. It reminded Arthur of Scotland. A place he was not going today, but now wished he was. With ginger cake and tea in their bellies, Arthur and Phil stepped out of the black London hackney and stood at the entrance of St. Pancras Station. Wanting no unnecessary delays, Arthur paid the driver and told him to keep the change. Euston Road traffic was like a box of chocolates, with an assortment of vehicles rumbling by. From the outside, St. Pancras Station could be mistaken for a cathedral, with towering Gothic steeples and arched windows. Only the large clock towers gave it away to be otherwise. Behind the huge red brick facade, high arched wrought iron ribs raised 100 feet high and twice as wide and 7 times as long. The interior housed the train station, complete with shops, cafes, and displays of every kind imaginable. In its heyday, it had been the largest single-spanned roof in the world. Its design copied around the world, including at Grand Central Station in New York. When one stepped into St. Pancras, one was stepping back 100 years in time, until the Channel had modernized it as an international terminal, and blended ancient Victorian architecture with contemporary design, accommodating incessant needs of the foreign passengers for faster trains. Shouldering their packs, they headed inside, negotiating through the crowd of people that were coming and going. Tourists stood like sticks in the mud, stagnating other frustrated travelers as they took photographs of the grand old Victorian wonder. Much like London, the station was cosmopolitan, contaminated with every nationality from every continent and beyond, encapsulating every occupation, ethnicity, and religion, as it should. It was a gateway for almost every international destination across Europe. If you look closely enough, you may even have seen an Englishman. England had been invaded many times in the past by Europeans, and this was simply the latest invasion, beginning with the Romans. Legions of foreigners now coming and going at will. The European Union had seen to that. Arthur and Phil went with the tide of people, drifting along with tidal eddies before merging with the crowd and becoming part of the whole. The Cardinal followed at an unnoticeable distance behind. Francis, who had been with the Cardinal at the entrance, had now become separated and was struggling to keep up. The sound inside the cathedral railway was surprisingly quiet, the high roof not allowing sound to condensate. Engines contributed musical tones periodically punctuated by conductors' whistles to signal that a departure. Vaguely knowing his way around the station, Arthur headed to the ticketing counter, discovering a long queue of anxious passengers waiting, colorful scarred travel bags by their sides. A large display board indicated the Eurostar to Brussels would not leave for another half hour. The queue grew gradually shorter, and they shuffled their way forward. Phil kept looking around as though he was in danger. He thought he saw someone staring at them. then dismissed it when he had lost sight of the old man. Then pondered if the old man had looking at him, or at the departure board behind them. Everyone seemed to be looking at everyone. Turning about to see, Arthur was about to secure the tickets to Budapest, via Brussels and Vienna. "First class, I hope?" enquired Phil, hoping he would be traveling in luxury. "In your dreams, my friend," Arthur replied, dampening Phil's enthusiasm and adding, "It's not really our money, so I better not be too reckless with it. Don't want to draw attention to two backpackers traveling first class, right?" "Yeah. I suppose you're right. Best keep our heads down," accepted Phil, feeling a little relieved now he had the tickets in hand, and that they were on their way. Wanting to grab a coffee at nearby cafe stand. This only reminded him of Zara and her smile. That only made him smile. "What's with you?" enquired Phil. "Nothing. Just a girl I know." "Do I know her?" hoping to divest his knowledge. "I don't think so." Thawing Phil's enthusiasm. Changing his mind about the coffee. Decided he would get one on the train, and headed for the platform where their Eurostar was waiting. Phil climbed aboard and went to find their assigned seats. Arthur hesitated a moment before he boarded. Looking back behind him. Not so much as to see if anyone was following him, but to take one last look at the station. Wondering if he would ever see it again. How much danger was he really in? Had he placed Phil's life at risk? He would not know until he got to Budapest. Hoping the puzzling situation would be solved by a professor of history and antiquities. Feeling the weight of the duffel bag pulling down on his shoulder strap. Reminding him of the gun and what he had gotten into. Hair on the back of his neck stood on end. Feeling like he was being watched. Looking about, he saw nothing suspicious. A carriage further back, two clergy gentlemen were boarding. A whistle blew, long and hard. And loud. "All aboard!" called out the platform conductor to the tardy stragglers, now running towards him. He would not be so cruel to leave them behind. This was of course England. Unlike European trains which ran precisely on time, English timetables were more like guidelines. Blowing his whistle again. Doors of the Eurostar closed smoothly with an assuring clunk, entrapping the swallowed prey within its long silver intestines, to be digested and evacuated across Europe. Soundlessly the train moved from Street Pancras station, heading smoothly along seasoned tracks to Brussels. Traveling at over 300 kilometers per hour, it would arrive in the ancient city in just over 2 hours. Phil found his seat, cramming his pack into the overhead locker. Arthur arrived soon after. Taking his seat, placed the duffel bag next to him. Both stared out the window, neither speaking, neither having ever traveled to where they were going. Budapest. The journey would be into the unknown. St. Pancras moved swiftly past their window. The rusting-stained railway yards disappeared from sight, and was replaced by the rusting golden autumn colors of the English countryside. "Idyllic," said Arthur, taking in the rare unseen beauty. "Divine," said Michael to himself, taking in the earthly creation. England slipping from their grasp. Leaving everything behind, all for the sake of a letter. A duffel bag of money, and a gun. It was a little too late to change his mind. The train swiftly sped east with the intermittent sound of the wheels passing over track partitions, checking the carriage for people who were out of place. A couple, a few seats ahead of them. A businessman, a few seats behind them. People had sporadically spread themselves throughout the compartment. As much as people sought to be socially accepted, they had an uncanny way of keeping a distinct social distance from each other. Trains, cinemas, restaurants, bus stops, and cafes. Had Arthur looked a further carriage back, he may have noticed two men. Or not. Father Michael. Several days earlier, on a train much slower than the Eurostar, Francis had dozed off soon after leaving the station at Amanti, held in position by the rays of the sun. The paperback still open on his lap. Rocking gently, the old train waltzed its way along the coastline. The idyllic scenery passing unseen by Francis, caught in dream. Passing through ancient Roman villages. Some little more than sleepy lanes, and sparkling coves of clear blue waters below.